Okay, we've got our stator cover here ready to come off. I'm going to take a 8mm, grab all these bolts around the outside here. I've got our shift linkage there I'm going to need to remove. We've got an exhaust cover brace here I'm going to need to remove, and a 14mm recoil bolt. Recoil bolt. You want to be careful when you remove this one, you don't get your motor turning because your cam chain will break your crankcase down below there if it turns and binds in there. So this can just be pried off. This has got splines and a seal in behind here, so sometimes it sticks, but get that pried off of there, and we'll grab a wrench and remove this linkage arm here. When you're going back together, remember there's a dot and a line on this shaft. That's where those two are supposed to go. So they mesh, so your four-wheeler shifts right. You want to make sure that that gets in the right groove there so you can shift back and forth easily. You might have to shift this lever back to be able to pull that bolt out of there, and you can just take and lift up on that arm. I like to shove those bolts back in there, get a thread or two so those stay together. Then you can grab a rubber mallet. I see we've got one more here, right in the middle that we need to remove. And that would not have come up had we grabbed that rubber mallet and started tapping on it. So, all right, once you grab that rubber mallet and tap on that a few times, a lot of times we can just take and work that off. Now there is going to be some magnetic pull because you've got your stator here and your flywheel here. Those do have magnets. I see here we've got a spring off of our seal here, so we know that our seal here is damaged. Make sure and get that replaced. I'll show you the special tool that we're going to use to remove this flywheel here, so stick with me to see that. We've got our pulsar here. Again, we have our stator here. Some people call these an alternator or a generator. The correct term for that is a stator. These don't actually charge your battery like, say, a car would with the alternator. This is a stator, so it just gives you the power, maintains your battery and where it's at. It does not actually charge your battery as a car would. So we'll set this aside for now, let some of that oil kind of drain out of there. And I'll go ahead and remove some of these shift parts here, some of these gears to get these out of the way before we remove this flywheel. Our gasket here you can see is extremely brittle. If this is as far as we're going, you want to make sure you don't drop any gasket or debris down in here. That goes all the way into your crankcase there. And if there's no reason to split that case, there's no use dumping debris down in there, so you do end up having to. Okay, we got that linkage off. We got a fork off of there. What I do to remove these forks is just pull up on the shafts and then remove that fork just like that. Don't try to pull that fork out. You won't be able to bend it past these gears there. That would work against yourself. These gears here, we'll pull a couple of these off as far as we can get. Some of these are actually stuck on a shaft that will go all the way through. And I try to keep these gears together as much as possible. That way, it just saves a little bit of time when we're going back together. So it's going to set these aside. Going to grab these and try to pull up as many of these as we can. Set those together. Keep in mind where your washers go. I just had a washer on top here. Got a bushing here. Looks a little bit loose there, so that may be our transmission issue. We may be slipping right there. So we're going to go ahead and inspect the rest of those bushings. I think that's probably where our problem's going to be. I wasn't totally sure, but I knew we had something going on with the transmission. So, okay, to pull our flywheel off now at this point, we'll grab a socket. It's a larger socket. Go ahead and remove that. And there's your nut there. Now, you'd think you'd just be able to take and lift that flywheel off. That's not the case. You need to have a special puller. Puller looks like this here. It's got a larger area here. Your crank is actually going to go up into this area. You've got interior threads here. You've got the exterior threads down on the actual flywheel. Along with this special tool, we're also going to get this. Now, this won't come with every flywheel puller, but it's good to have. I'll give you a link of one of these without this, one of them with, just in case you already have this for some odd reason. The other thing that you can do is put a nut on there, and that'll keep from damaging that crankshaft. When you take and run this down, you're going to spin this in, and you're going to put this bolt right here, this longer shaft here, is going to push against your crankshaft. What you don't want to do is damage those threads. therein lies this piece. Spin this on there, go down as far as you can. That's going to protect those threads. Now, what you don't want to do is spin this so far that it's hitting against this flywheel, because then you're going to be working against yourself. So leave a little bit of room there. I like to leave about 1/8 of an inch, and then I'll take and spin this on as far as it'll go and snug it up. You don't want to just spin this on a thread or two. You want to make sure you have the right puller, make sure it goes on all the way, or you're going to damage this very expensive flywheel here, and that is not what you want to do. Once you got that threaded on, make sure it's snug. Grab a 19 millimeter in this case, slide that socket on there. We're going to take and we're going to run this puller in now. Now keep in mind, it's not going to go up very far. So it's only going to go up 1/8 of an inch. I didn't see that pop. Typically what you'll do is see a lot of times, you'll see those things pop. So I am certain that our flywheel has not been come up yet. A couple different options at this point. What you can do, take a hammer, tap on it. So sometimes that'll loosen it up just like it did. So the pressure of that slamming down onto that crankshaft, actually push on that cap, pop that flywheel off. You can see there it's loose, but again, you're not gonna be able to pull it off until we remove that cap. So the other option you could do is grab a pneumatic impact, something with a little more power. Keep running this bolt down until it's able to push that flywheel off of there. We could have gone either way, but we had this hammer here on the workbench, so I just took and slammed on it. Now, it didn't damage any other parts, didn't damage that crankshaft because of this cap. Again, I'll put a link below so you know where to get both of these flywheel puller tools. A lot of times they come as a set. Check out my store. A lot of times I'll have those listed, or I'll at least give you a link. So we've got the flywheel ready to come off now. You got a one-way bearing in behind there. We've got your starter gear here, and this is a gear with two different gears actually on it. Set that aside. Our starter's here. Our starter engages that idler gear, the one that I just removed. It's going to spin this larger gear around. It's going to utilize this one-way bearing and start that motor. Then it's going to release. When you let off the starter button, it's going to stop spinning that starter. That idler gear is just going to spin in there, and so you don't cause that motor to continue to turn over. So that's how the starter system works. Here's your flywheel there. I'm going to set it aside. You want to inspect it, make sure there's no damage on that. We've got, again, our one-way gear, our idler gear here. That's the large idler gear, our starter gear is what some people call it. We've got a woodruff key that's stuck in our crankshaft here. We can leave that. A lot of times those are good. You have to order those separate from any other kit. They don't come with a gasket kit. Sometimes they'll come with your crankshaft. So keep that in mind depending on where you order it. See if you got a new woodruff key or not. So if you don't, just go ahead and use this other one. Unless there's some wobble in there, some wiggle room, you can go ahead and reuse that. Got our chain now that we can just take and pull off. And we'll take that off that bottom sprocket there. Go ahead and remove that chain. Make sure there's no kinks or binds in that. We'll set that with the cam chain tensioner there. And then we'll go ahead and continue removing these gears, linkage here, and our sensors there. Also, have shot several videos on removing the prop shaft yoke set coming out of the front of this motor here, going to the front differential. I've showed you how to replace that U-joint and replace those yokes, so check that video out. We need snap ring pliers now for this snap ring and that snap ring. Go ahead and remove this snap ring here, larger one. Oh, it was able to come off of there, so I was able to pull that one off. You can see we've had some water sitting down here. You can see water is continuing to flow out of there. And we got to get past this gasket here. Again, very, very brittle gasket. We set all these parts, all our transmission parts together there. Remove this and a washer in behind there. And I've got a shift arm there that's going to be removed with a 10 millimeter socket. Spring loaded, so be careful. You don't lose any parts there. And that is thread locked in there when you're going back together. There's your shift linkage there. There's a little post, probably can't see. There's a little post there that spring hooks on. I'm going to remove a couple more 8 millimeter bolts on this side. I'm going to flip this motor over and remove a handful of the bolts over there. Remove those clutches. So there's a couple engine shift cable holders here that I want to remove, and also a couple sensors. Also going to go around and remove these crankcase bolts. Okay, we've got our gear position sensor off there. You can see underneath of there that tells you where you're at. All right, we've got your other sensor off here. It sits right on your shift mechanism. That's what that one looks like. And I'm gonna go ahead and remove a couple more 8mm bolts that I can get to now. Motor flipped up now. I'm going to take this clutch pack off of here. We've had some transmission issues. I showed you some gears on the other side there. That could be our potential problem here, but I'm going to go ahead and finish splitting this case so we know for sure that we've got everything taken care of with those other gears on the stator side there. So I'm going to remove the starter. I'm going to remove the clutch pack. We've got our oil pump down here, our shift mechanism here, speedo gear here. We've got our dips or our oil fill here, and a handful of bolts to go ahead and split this case. To pull the starter off here, we've got two 8mm bolts, one here, one there. And you can just take and tap this up. A lot of times, take a rubber mallet or something and tap on this, or you can just use your fingers here. There we go. There, you've got an O-ring that seals that up. You want to make sure that that O-ring is good. Otherwise, you could be getting potentially water and debris down into your other side there. So check that starter. We'll go ahead and do a test on that and make sure it works good. I'll show you how to do that here in a bit. We've got a gear down here coming right off of our crank that we will need to pull at some point. 10mm to pull this shift arm here. And then we'll lift this arm off of here. That arm is off, and I'm going to go ahead and run that bolt back down in there. And then to pull our clutch, what I'm going to do is remove these 10mm bolts, and there's 4 of them. Go ahead and remove those. We've got springs underneath of there. I'm going to go ahead and leave those there for now. I'm going to grab a socket for that larger nut. All right, we've got 1 inch and 1/16 here. And I'm going to go ahead, we could remove these springs, but not necessarily going to have to. I do want to make it sure we hang on to this, otherwise it's going to turn this over. If anything catches, it could break shift arms there or create some more damage. Go ahead and spin that off of there. Now we'll be able to take and remove that entire clutch pack off. Now what I'm going to do is take and put this back on there just to keep everything together. All right, we've got our oil pump we're going to remove. We've got a little clip here. I'm going to take a small screwdriver, get it behind that clip. We're going to now be able to pull that gear off of there. This gear that's on our crank is also going to come off at the same time. Go ahead and remove that. Then there's a little pin that runs through our oil pump there. You want to make sure and remove it so it doesn't drop down into your crankcase there. Now we've got 3 screws we're going to remove. Okay, we're going to remove that oil pump. I'm going to you can see there the direction of that oil pump, how that gear goes on there, that sprocket there. I'm going to make sure you don't forget about your pin running through there. Okay, we've got a couple of shift mechanisms we're going to remove now. 10mm. That sits right on the shift drum there. We can remove this. There's some posts in there and a spring-loaded shaft here. We're going to remove that 12mm. We're going to set all the transmission parts together. I'll show you those towards the end of the video. Got our shift star there. Shift shaft I'm going to pull out here along with the spring. Keep all that together. Before I start removing crankcase bolts here, I'm going to go ahead and remove this speedometer gear assembly. It takes 2 8mm. Now if we're just going to pull the gear out of here, we could use a 10mm, pull that gear straight out of there. I'm going to remove the entire thing, clean it up, make sure it's in good working condition. So I'm going to use 8mm socket here and remove that. And then there'll be a gasket in behind here. You want to make sure that that's in good condition. Your complete gasket kit will come with a new gasket for that. But there's your speedo gear there. Again, we could pull this up if we remove this 10mm, take and pull this up to get that out of there. And that goes up to the handlebars, or your gauge there. So now I'm going to start removing our 10mm bolts all the way around, or excuse me, I'm going to start removing our 8mm bolts around here. We've got a 12mm bolt here. It's a little bit larger. And then we are going to have to remove the dipstick and the drain plug. And I'm going to flip that up maybe at this time and do that. Three 8mm nuts. 3 8mm bolts there. Remove 1, 3 there. And we'll just be able to take and remove this. All right, and that is sealed up with an O-ring. Make sure that's in good condition. You can see there metal shavings. It's pretty clear we had some transmission issues or some bearing issues of some sort. You've got a screen in here we're going to remove. Make sure that that's all cleaned out, but we've got a small handful of shavings and debris down in here that we need to get cleaned out. As far as removing our crankcase, splitting our crankcase, we don't actually have to pull any bolts that are in here, but we're going to do that when we go and clean this crankcase up to go back together. So at this point, I'm going to take and start removing bolts around this crankcase. Alright, one thing to note before you go to split this case, we do have a pin that comes in right here. If you remember this gear that we pulled off of your crankshaft, you've got a pin, like sort of a woodruff key style pin that goes into this crankshaft, holds this gear from moving, from pivoting. You want to make sure you remove that, or when you slide this crankshaft out of that bearing there, it's going to get caught. It's going to give you some grief. So pull that out. I'm going to lay this crankcase down and tap on the end there. Using a rubber mallet, I like to hang on to one side and then tap on the other. You can see we're already splitting apart. Sometimes you get held up in an area. If that's the case, like so we're splitting apart here, which is going to be pretty obvious why, because we're tapping here. But if our back for some reason isn't splitting at all, or you can see some stress there, you want to double check that you've got all those bolts if you haven't already. So we'll go ahead and start tapping on the back shaft here. All right, we flip this around. What I'm actually going to do, go ahead and turn it back around this way, laying it on this side. We've got more shafts sticking out of the other side. This side we've got a rear shaft here. We've got our clutch shaft here and our crankshaft here. So I have a feeling that a lot of our gears are going to try to stay on that other side there. So once we get enough distance in there by using a rubber mallet and spreading that open, we can take and just kind of pivot that with our hands, try to get all those gears to stay in one side or the other. Now if we're finding that we can lift up on this side and all of our gears are coming with, then we're going to want to flip this crankcase over so that our gears are going to set kind of, we use gravity to hold all that together. So I'm going to go ahead and set these with our clutch pack there. And I think everything's going to come out fairly smoothly. So there is the inside of that crankcase on that Quadrunner 250. Set that aside there. We've got our prop shaft running through here and our yoke set up here. We're going to go ahead and, like I said, I've showed you several videos how to pull these yokes apart, replace those U-joints. So probably no need for me to do that again. I'll put a link below for those videos, but we got our prop shaft coming out here, going to our front differential, our bevel gear, some people call them a transfer gear. Here, these two gears, when you purchase this from Suzuki, will come as a set. They're very, very expensive. They do come as a set because they work together. They start meshing together. You want to make sure that you buy those new together as opposed to one used one, one new one, or random used ones. They're going to wear differently. So one's going to cause the other one to wear quicker than the other if that's the case. Sort of like a chain and sprocket, you just replace those all at the same time. That way everything is wearing together. So got our shift linkage up here. You've got more shift forks on these posts here. You got your shift drum here, crankshaft here. And we'll pull this prop shaft out so you can see what that looks like. And then this gear, we're able just to pull out. Again, our transmission that we set over here is going to ride on that shaft there. This larger gear sits in the back. These are where your axles come into on either side. So that's our larger gear in the rear. And then our transmission we just pull out. And I try to keep as much of this together as possible. When you drop something like this, just make sure you right away put that back where it goes so you remember exactly how it's set out there. And then our shift arm here. I'm gonna pull this fork out here. I just go along and see what parts can be pulled out together, because you don't want to just take and jerk this all out of here. You're gonna have pieces going everywhere, but if you can get to a point where you're removing a handful of things at once, that's great. Shift drum there. Our star sits on top of that. Now I think we're gonna have enough room to pull out this shifter arm here. We've got a sensor that actually sits right on the end of that. And then these forks are gonna be able to be pulled out now at this time. Pull the shaft up, slide the forks at an angle, and slide them out. I'm gonna slide this one back on. We've got our forks out. Now we've got our transmission. Should be able to keep these as a set. And I kind of grab farthest bottom point that I can. Just looking a real quick glance here, none of these gears are worn. So I think our issue that I showed you earlier, our transmission on the other side underneath that side case, it was going to be the issue. We wouldn't have had to split this case, but now I can inspect everything, get it on here, make sure all the specs are right. We can go through and replace seals, stuff like that. Put this back together so you can see that whole process. To get the crank out, this is going to be a good crank. I've saved the end of that crank shaft using that flywheel puller that I showed you earlier. Check that video out. We'll just take and tap that out. You never want to use more force than that to get a crankshaft out, especially the smaller end here. Could damage that, bend this, cause some serious issues there. So there is our crankshaft. Make sure that that's straight, make sure it's in good condition, make sure there's no excessive play on there. And then our crankcase here is ready to be cleaned up. We'll throw it in the cleaner and get it nice and shiny, get it ready to go back together, replace those bearings and seals, and get everything ready to go. So this video has been helpful. Make sure you subscribe to our channel, hit the thumbs up button for us. We appreciate you guys sharing this video and other videos with all your friends and family. Make sure you let everybody know who we are, what we do. Gonna work with you guys to repair all these ATVs. Thanks a lot.